I was enjoying my cornflakes this morning whilst reading one of the national newspapers and listening to a bit of breakfast television this morning when an idea popped into my head, a question it was, and I realised, not that I actually have a television or indeed read national newspapers, and I certainly don't eat highly processed food, so actually all of that was a lie. But that's what my question was actually about, really. It was about the big lie. Does anybody actually these days believe in man-made global warming? I mean, is there anybody left on this planet that actually thinks it's true that man is responsible for the heating up of the atmosphere and that we're all doomed? I mean, I know there's that little girl. Well, she's not a little girl anymore. She's an adult and she's still clinging on to that, how dare you business, that we're all doomed. And the mainstream media, of course, they're the ones that continually perpetuate this nonsense. Oh, and the government with all their little policies. But does anybody actually believe in this thing about man-made global warming? I mean, surely now, because I'm finding it very difficult to believe any of this nonsense, because everywhere I look, I'll see reports about the polar bears. They're thriving, They're loving it. They're having a wonderful time. There's so many of them. They're wandering down into the towns, popping into the convenience stores, buying themselves some fizzy drinks, putting their feet up in the pubs and having a good natter with people. There's so many of them. They're moving around. They're not worried about the lack of ice because, they know the ice will come back. And actually, with all the ice taking up the ocean, it's very hard for them to go and do the fishing they need to do. So in fact, as the ice caps melt a little bit, as they do naturally, it makes life very easy for polar bears. And so that's one of those myths that we've been told. And the Great Barrier Reef, we were told, oh no, it's all gone white, it's all sort of dying off. But actually that's a natural process and that's thriving as well. It's very hard to keep believing that it's man-made global warming or that there is any global warming other than the natural stuff from the old ice age that we've come out of anyway. So it beggars belief that people are still holding on to it. And more scientists are actually beginning to speak out and say, do you know what? Actually, this is a load of rubbish. I mean, the scientists, of course, who are not reliant on their money coming in by sort of claiming that there is man-made global warming. We know that this is a complete psyop. We know now, surely, there is nobody on this planet who thinks that this is true and genuine, which is why, of course, the mainstream media will fly out a BBC reporter to the Greek islands and say, oh no, panic, it's a hot day here in the Greek islands, near the equator. It's hot day here and blimey, it must be global warming that set these fires alight. Except that the people in the Greek islands actually know that, no, this goes on all the time. These are just arsonists. It happens everywhere. We've seen it in Australia as well. When the Australian fires come about, people go out, they set fires. Some of them are arsonists and some of them are just idiots who don't realise that actually on very hot, dry days, don't go and have a campfire because it'll get out of control very easily because all the bush is extremely bone dry. And before you know it, oh my goodness. And, people get a bit bored. Wouldn't it be a laugh? Set a bit of a fire over here. It would be quite fun. Not realising, not having the responsibility of thinking actually somebody might die. And then when it gets a bit out of control, they leg it and they don't want to own up and say, oh no, actually it was me. I just had a cigarette and threw it away. No. It's far easier to say it's man-made global warming and because of that we're all going to die. Well, we know that this, as I said before, is a complete lie. I think it was the Club of Rome that came up with the idea many moons ago and said, do you know what? What we're going to do is we're going to make out that it's the environment. If we can get everybody worried about the environment, we can control people. Get rid of those useless eaters. We can have all sorts of policies. And so this sort of filtered down into various governments. And so now we have this whole load of nonsense about the net zero in this country. And here's us, we produce, what is it, 1% of CO emissions anyway? We're a tiny dot, we're barely doing anything against the world, and yet we're the ones that are going to commit suicide by having everything turned round into electricity. I mean, I just find that I can't even bring the words out anymore. Sitting here day after day, pontificating about the same old rubbish, seeing that as I drive around the countryside, going and having little talks with people about the problems of the world, and glancing out of the van as I drive and seeing swathes of the countryside covered in all these solar farms, hundreds and hundreds of these solar farms, which of course on a day like today, and I can tell you it's piercing down with rain, is really generating a lot of electricity. And then yesterday was pretty windless, and so all those wind farms that are going around desperately trying to chop at the birds as they fly through are pretty much stationary. I mean, it does seem a bit mad that here we are in this world claiming that man-made global warming is the devil incarnate, and we've got to have these rather sort of, free energy things like the solar and like the wind, and yet we know that they're problematical. And what we're going to do before we transition, we'll get rid of all the coal-fire power stations that has been doing everything. And then, great idea, we'll get rid of everybody's car and we'll say you've got to have an electric vehicle. An electric vehicle that normally takes, as I understand it, probably the amount of electricity that 3 households would require just to charge up one car. And where are you going to do it? It's hours and hours to charge up your car in a petrol station or an EV station. So you can imagine the queues are everywhere. But my friend Jeff from Jeff Buys Cars just reported, I noticed on YouTube, that there was some container ship with one of these cars, these EV cars, because they keep exploding, caught fire. And now the whole ship was on fire. And apparently there's been several of those in the last few years. And you just think this is nonsense. This doesn't happen with those cars that have far more inflammable fuel like petrol or in fact diesel. They don't just blow up and catch fire. It just seems a bit of a nonsense. We're going down this, we're penalising people, we're making their lives misery, we're telling them they've got to have these heat pumps and not their gas boilers. The government just seems hell-bent on destroying the country. We have the cost of living crisis, and so, oh, no, we're going to charge you ever so more all the time. We haven't got enough electricity. They're threatening that the power might go out at any time. Is it me, though? Is it me? Is the only one left to saying there is no such thing as man-made global warming? If only we could get more and more people to accept the notion that this is a myth, this is a lie, then perhaps we could get rid of the government, put in a government that goes, oh yeah, this is a lie, this is a rubbish, there's no need for us to commit suicide. Let's stand in our sovereignty, let's be proper grown-ups again and decide that we're not going to put up with this nonsense, that we're going to thrive, we're going to make fuel and fuel cheaper for everybody. Let's not have an oppressed society. Push back against the people like the WEF and the Club of Rome and all these people who would like to control us, and say, no, in this country, we're not having any of that. We are going to become responsible and kind, nice, benevolent people who just turn around and realise once and for all that this man-made global warming nonsense is just that. It's just a load of hokum, for goodness sake.